Morning, everybody. I am so deeply honored and thrilled to have the opportunity to speak to Garry Kasparov, who, among many, many other things, is the chairman of the Renew Democracy Initiative. He's the publisher of thenextmove.org on Substack. Please go to his Substack and subscribe if you're not there already. Hi, Garry. It's really wonderful to see you.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me. Actually, you just revealed your Russian language knowledge. Because you said Kasparov. This is every American says Kasparov. It doesn't matter, but it's just. But
I have a husband who's not Russian, and so he's a big hockey player. And every time we watch hockey players, he's always asking me the Russian ones, what does that mean? What does that mean? And so that's our thing that we do in this house, because all of them have last names that obviously mean something in Russian. But really, really good to see you here, and so much to talk about.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We're not running short of topics. I can
tell you. That's for sure. The one thing that I want to start off with, because you've been so prolific on this, is just your worldview of America's role in the wake of, I mean, every day there's something new, but this time in the wake of Trump pulling troops out of Germany, it seems to me that if I were Putin, I'd be sitting in the Kremlin, just sitting back and loving this. But what do you make of this in terms of America's role going forward? We've only got a few years left of Trump, but are we ever going to be able to go back to the Pax Americana that we used to have, or do you think that's all over now?
I think you have a very conservative estimation. It's not every day, it's every hour.
Yeah.
Yes. And speaking about America's influence, America's role, is there any America's role left? I just recently, a couple of hours ago, spoke to my friends in Estonia. And it's the same mood, from Estonia to Latvia to Lithuania to all the countries that are close to Russia, or other countries that are just, like a second tier. So countries that recognize that America is no longer America they used to know. I grew up in a world where America was there. Democrat, Republican, Carter, Reagan, it doesn't matter, America. People could love it, could hate it, but they knew it was like, just it's an immovable object, the rock. It's for dissidents, was a beacon of hope, for the garden of democracy. But for almost everybody on the planet, it was a force you have to reckon with. And playing the games with America was not a good idea. And when you heard a powerful voice from the White House, whether it was Harry Truman, John F. Kennedy, Ronald Reagan, they listened. They recognized that it's serious. And it's not just recently. So we all remember that Joseph Stalin, all-powerful dictator. I mean, I wouldn't even compare him to Putin, but he stopped short of shooting British planes that delivered airlift to Berlin, West Berlin, besieged West Berlin, because he knew Harry Truman was a man of action. And today, it's the end of the era. We may argue that probably, it had to happen earlier. We could start, debating whether Bill Clinton and Bush 43, they had no game plan to prepare America for the new challenges. It's all good, but as a matter of fact, it's just we're dealing now with something that goes just beyond any normal discussion. While we can analyze the actions or inaction of previous presidents, and could be highly critical, as I was about Obama or Biden or Bush 43, but we still, operated within the same, it's like the same framework. It's the good, bad. So we had a certain system of measurement. Today, it's all bets are off. I often compare Trump to a bulldozer. As a bulldozer, he can just, he can crush some of the constructions that are outdated, irrelevant, but he doesn't care. I mean, it's everything that stands on his way. And the overall impression in Europe is that NATO is dead. Actually, I knew NATO was dead. I said it many times before, but right now it's very clear that it's no longer there. It hasn't died, from a violent action. It just probably outlived its importance, and now we have to look for some new arrangements, and somehow things happening. The problem, if we now go back to America and look at American perspectives, the problem is that everything that's being built in Europe now is minus America. And the consequences, actually answering your question, is the consequences for this, I wouldn't say stupid, it's arrogant, hectic, I'm trying to be diplomatic, actions of Donald Trump, they may be felt not just for next 2 years or next presidency, I think most likely Democratic, it could be probably for decades, because it's the entire world that was built around America's military, economic, and political power is over. And it's now, we are now, I believe, is in kind of period of transition. And the year 2026 is, I believe, will offer us some ideas about the contours of the new framework. But America's role will be very, very different. And if Trump and his acolytes believe that it's just, oh, we'll move a few troops here and there, we'll teach Europeans lessons, it's easy to lose your reputation, to recover it, especially in a world that is much more competitive. It's not 1945 when America was all powerful. You have other countries. Germany is rising now, and Europe is, and the question is, why do we need America? And by the way, why do we need US dollar? So why do we need America to dictate the terms? Yes, it's the biggest economy, but it's not, again, the same 1945. It's not half of the world economy. It's a different world, and I'm afraid that America's role will be reconsidered beyond America's ability to influence it.
You said that NATO's dead. You've been saying that for a while. It was a fairly controversial thing when you said it. I think more and more people are coming around to your way of thinking on it. I guess the question for you is NATO even worth reconstituting in some form, or is it something that's worth trying to resurrect once Trump is gone? Let's assume that there's a Democratic president. Let's assume it's a normal Democratic president who wants to go back to the way things were. Is that possible? Is it worth it? Or do we need something different? And if so, what would that something different be in your viewpoint?
Oh, I think the relevance of any international institutions and agreements is based on threats or challenges they have to tackle. NATO was built in 1949, and the Truman administration needed this alliance to prevent, very likely, Stalin's aggression against Western Europe. And let's remember, the potential theater of war was in West Germany. Okay. So the River Rhine was just, this is one of the last standing line between Stalin's tanks and the rest of the Western Europe. Since then, the world map has changed dramatically. And NATO borders moved to the east. And it's not just including other countries. It's basically changing the priorities. NATO includes, I think, 32 countries now. And at least half of them have no interest of investing heavily in fighting Russia for various reasons. But we just have to recognize that if we are talking about democracies and about, the preferences of voters, why the people in Portugal and Spain have to invest heavily in NATO that has only one threat, which is so far away from their borders. While NATO is in current form, looks for me it's not just irrelevant. It's basically reneged on its main goal, which was to stop Russian aggression, and the only time when it had to react, it failed. NATO participated in many wars, but outside of Europe. But the only challenge to European security that came from the main enemy, Russia, Soviet Union, Russia, that was, on the original plan of NATO to oppose, NATO waffled, ducked. I don't know. Just you come up with the correct description of NATO behavior, but it categorically refused to take part in a war it was built for. So that's why we are now facing the rebuilding of European defense alliances. And it's not just minus America. It's basically, they recognize that they have to look for a coalition of countries that have direct interest, that have too much at stake. Obviously, you need Germany, that is not directly bordering Russia. But then, you look at countries, at Baltic nations, and at Poland, at Romania, and of course Nordic countries, and of course Ukraine, which is quite unusual. That is at the 5th year of the war, a European Commissioner on Defense and Space, a former Prime Minister of Lithuania, Andrius Kubilius, which is interesting. It's a first year when they just had this position. Europe never had a commissioner of defense, because the defense and war was never on the cards. Europe was built for improving social, financial, economic conditions. Never wanted to touch anything war related. Now they have to. But the idea is just of European Defense Union is basically to bring Ukraine in and bring Norway. It's not part of the European Union, and considering or just accepting the fact that for the immediate future, America is not there. Yes, it's nice for us to dream or to expect that another president, who I believe very likely be the Democrat, will start rebuilding the ties. But again, doesn't happen overnight. This is not, we push one button and then just, do undo. This is not, your computer screen. Europeans have to now basically erase the old defense plans that include an American component, build new plans. And if they do that, why they have to bring America back? America is God knows where. And obviously, you have Trump, say you have Democrat, but God knows what comes next. America lost its reputation. And again, the damage, the geopolitical damage, which may lead to damages in economy and military production, these damages will be felt over many, many years, if not decades.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because I think the viewpoint in Europe and elsewhere is the first time with Trump might have been an aberration, but we came back the second time for round two. Mm-hmm. And so who's to say we're not going to come back for round three with another Tucker Carlson or somebody of that ilk who believes
much younger Trump. Yeah,
a younger Trump, or J.D. Vance, which is in many ways, I think, more dangerous than Trump, and so on. And so, look, what's interesting to me about this is you're absolutely right that NATO was built for a Soviet threat. It was built to prevent Stalin from going further west, but that threat has not gone away. And I think what's interesting is that you're absolutely right that as NATO has effectively become completely defangled, the threat still exists. And in fact, what we're seeing right now is that for the first time since 1939, there is a possibility that Russia can go into a place like Poland. Certainly, they would love to have the Baltics back. You're talking about a Russian leader who said that the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century was the destruction of the Soviet Union.
And he said it in 2005. Just
correct. Yes.
Let's remind our audience, it was 21 years ago. This is not that Vladimir Putin, had made secrets of his plans, which is quite amazing, because we can blame him for all the crimes he committed, and rightly so, but he was always quite open about his intentions to rebuild the greatest Russian empire.
And you're absolutely right that it is the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union.
Absolutely, that's the way he sees it. That's why every time he talks to foreign leaders about history, he always extends it to the Kiev Rus, which is sounds quite odd, because he's talking about basically Ukrainian Russian roots. While what Muscovy roots are just more connected to Golden Horde, it's more than Asian. But still, again, it's in Putin's mind, it's Russian Empire. And that's why we should recognize that as long as Russian Empire exists, and it's the last empire on earth, the threat will never go away.
And that empire, for people who don't know, extended into Poland, it extended into Sweden, it extended into Finland.
Finland. It's at its peak, it's before World War I. Right. It covered a considerable part of Poland, the entire Finland. Yeah, if we're talking about that, and so of course the former Soviet Union. So it's and of course it was the largest land empire in the world, and Vladimir Putin, I think it's not so much for him it's not territory, but it's about greatness. Because as for territory, and I think he understands that Russia is gradually losing lands again to China on the east. But it's more about just recovering the greatness. Everybody should talk to us. Everybody should respect. We have our legitimate rights to our domains. That's his language, and his ultimatum in December 2021, about NATO being pushed back to 1997 borders, basically it was a repetition of what he said in 2007. Looking straight in the eyes of Bush 43 and all other leaders of the free world, Vladimir Putin explained that in his mind, Russia was in the position to be compensated for the loss of the Cold War by regaining its greatness and influence, not occupation, but still great influence in all the countries that were under its control before the collapse of the Soviet Union.
And so to me, the threat is not gone. In fact, the threat in some ways is accelerated. And yet no structure exists the way NATO existed in the 1950s and further on to counter that threat. As you said, as you said, Stalin took Truman seriously. If I'm Putin, not only do I not take Trump seriously, I haven't taken any American president seriously since I got in. I mean, you have George Bush, who basically let him walk into parts of Georgia and did not push back, looked to the, said that's crazy thing about looking to his eyes and seeing his soul. Obama told Mitt Romney, I mean, one of the most maddening parts of Obama's tenure was when he said to Mitt Romney, the Cold War called and they want their foreign policy back, when Romney very rightly said that Russia is the biggest threat that faces the world. And of course, you've got Trump, who did everything Putin effectively wants, and Biden, who waited way too long to do anything on Ukraine and did not do enough. So when you have a Russian leader who understands that American presidents on both sides of the aisle are not what Harry Truman was, or even John F. Kennedy with what he did, what are we to make of a lack of alliance or leadership to stop Putin from doing what he wants, which is, let's say, marching into Lithuania, marching into the rest after he's done with Ukraine, potentially marching into Poland even? What are we to make of that? And what is preventing him from doing that from the position of the United States right now?
The only reason Vladimir Putin has not yet attacked Baltic nations or Poland is called Ukraine. It's Ukraine with its leadership, with on top with President Zelensky and with its heroic nation that basically depleted Putin's invading armies. Putin was on the way to regain control of Eastern Europe. And the free world, let's be honest, in February 2022 was ready to give up. Everything America offered Zelensky was basically a right, run away and have kind of government in exile. We have now more and more evidence. Hopefully, the new government of Peter Magyar will reveal the ultimate truth about Hungary and the leadership of Viktor Orban conspiring with Putin to take Hungarian part of Ukraine. So basically, to divide Ukraine, and it's not. I'm just fantasizing. Vladimir Putin's propaganda kept insisting that Ukraine was an artificial state that didn't belong to the map. And they talked about other countries like Poland, for instance, take whatever it's yours. So basically, they're just cutting Ukraine in pieces. And in 2022, it looked like everything was lost because years of this you may call negligence, cowardice, naivete, stupidity of several administrations, both Democratic and Republicans, led to the situation where Putin believed that nobody was standing against him. Again, it's a normal dictatorship reaction. It's not about why; it's about why not. I mean, why not? And Vladimir Putin's memorandum or ultimatum, December 1991, looked like was a part of something that he discussed with first Trump administration. Again, I don't have all the data, but we can see some pieces of truth here and there. The Stoltenberg, the former Norwegian prime minister and former general secretary of NATO, he talked in his recent book that there was no negotiation, but there was a discussion about NATO rolling back to 1997 borders back in September 2021. That tells us that something happened probably before, which means Trump was in the office. And when Trump says, "Oh, with me there will be no war," maybe he's telling the truth. Maybe he was willing to sell Ukraine to Putin. So sometimes we should trust them. I mean, these guys, they can slip off the tongue when they tell the truth. And Biden was not prepared to fight back. He had one summit with Putin in June 2021, and then there were two I would call them also phone summits, because they had two Zoom calls with all key people from both sides. And it seems to me that Americans recognized that the threat was imminent. And Bill Burns was going back and forth, trying to play Kissinger's shuttle diplomacy, trying to slow it down or prevent it. But eventually, CIA and Pentagon believed that Ukraine would not survive for long. So Putin did what he expected to be a big victory. And everything that saved Europe was not, European Union, it was not America. It was the price Ukraine paid to stop Putin's army, to deplete them. And now, against all the odds, it seems they're winning. Of course, it was America's help. It was Europe that donated, and many countries basically shared everything they had. But it's about both political leadership and about a phenomenal. It's just not heroism; it's more. It's just it's what always happened with free people fighting for their freedom and becoming, it's showing the sign of genius. It's resilience, everything. So Ukraine built the strongest army in Europe, and that's why now the answer to their question: what stops Putin from invading Europe? Ukrainian army. So that's why the Ukrainian army will be the core element of new European security. And I think as we speak now, our friends in Baltic nations, in Nordic nations, in Poland, in Germany, they're debating how to build the most effective defense against this threat, which is still there. Not because Putin can expect to roll over, with his tanks all the way to Berlin, but because he could be out of total desperation. He can try to change the narrative and to have some sort of illustration that NATO is dead by attacking one of the small Baltic nations.
So it sounds to me like you are a little much more, well, I should say a little more optimistic than I would have thought about the future here because of what's going on in Ukraine, because Ukraine is creating this new extra American security parameter with the Baltic nations, with potentially the Scandinavian nations, and with their drone warfare, in fact, helping us to some extent, or offering to help us. We shot them down in Iran. You have written, I think, very eloquently about the fact that Iran is basically an extension of the Ukraine war, and that this is, and I've said the same, that this is effectively, to me, World War III. It's just a different front in the war that we've begun, that began, I think, even before this full-scale invasion, even before Crimea. It really began in 2008 when Putin went into Georgia. Tell me more about that, about your views about Iran, and exactly in what ways did Trump's policy on Ukraine set up this blunder in Iran?
Yeah, I think we are in agreement that this is a global war.
Right.
So whether it's World War III or by Putin's books is World War IV, because World War III was a Cold War, but it's a world war. And it includes players from all over the world. Because when you look at the coalition of countries fighting on both sides, I mean, it basically covers, the old key players. And China is behind it. Yeah, so of course, China is not taking direct part in that, but it's helping Iran, maybe indirectly. It's helping Putin openly, supporting Putin economically and technologically. And God knows what happens with Taiwan if Ukraine, if Putin succeeds in destroying NATO and Ukraine in this war. So that's why I think it's very important to see this big picture. And the Ukrainian war made, I think, became a turning point in the history of military strategy. It's today the military battlefield is radically different from what 5 years ago. Somebody should tell Secretary Hexet that it's a different war, and some female with a good female drone operators could basically decimate, his macho battalions that will show their tattoos.
His Crusader cosplaying, right?
I spoke to one of the Ukrainians who was in the team of 10 Ukrainian units that operated drones and decimated 2 NATO battalions in the war games, and he just said it's amazing. These guys, they had no idea what's coming. So I wouldn't blame them because they learned something, just it's both from the books in the academies and also on the battlefield. That's a different story. Today, some people compare this Ukrainian front line with the trenches of the World War I. It's a very remote comparison because yes, there's a no man land, like a dead zone, but it's not because of the barbed wire, because of drones. And it's not a couple of or a mile or just a couple of miles. This is it's 50 kilometers. So and Ukrainians build this. It's a wall. It's a wall of drones. That is just the war is being played differently. Actually, I could just slide, it's a deviation. First time actually when we saw this, and it's amazing that Russians paid no attention. You remember there was a very short war between Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Yes.
And Azerbaijan successfully used drones, mostly Turkish drones, Bayraktars, against Russian tanks. And they decimated the strongest part of Armenian army was Russian tanks. That brought Armenia success in the previous wars against Azerbaijan. And they were totally destroyed.
It's very
skillful drone operation actually helped Azerbaijan to have very spectacular victory very quickly. And that was the first time when we saw the drones playing a role. And the beginning of Ukraine war, again, those are small components, but Iran actually has been working on it. That's going back to the alliance of dictators, and the Russian supply of drones came from Iran, and now it's going opposite direction. Most of the American targets hits. They were Iranian original drones updated by Russians, and that's speaking about the intelligence or lack of thereof in American administration. This administration, how could you attack Iran without preparing to counter main Iranian weapon, which were drones? And what country on earth had the best experience of dealing with drones? Ukraine. So it's I would call it insanity, which is probably just the right word, talking about the man who's making decisions. But you have people around him. I mean, it's like this level of sycophancy. I mean, it's inability to, just to inject a dose of common sense. That's what brought America to this predicament. Because right now everybody saw that America with all these weapons, basically failed to bring Iran to its knees, to its knees. Yeah, they're successful, but the cost, this because now war is also economic. So the using expensive missiles just to hit drones. Let's say the one drone is $50,000, the big Shahed. So you cannot spend 1 million or more in just its worth of missile to hit it. So Ukrainians basically now, this is when you look at it, it's roughly, I heard the latest number, $7,000 to invest to hit one Shahed. So it's you had this data, you had this experience, and that's probably it will be studied in the books how Americans missed completely. The fact is that there was a war where America took part. Some private American companies actually already participated in the production, but Pentagon was slow to actually recognize this reality, which cost America few lives, but enormous prestige. And again, God knows how can you repair it. And at the end of the day, the big question is what will happen with the military-industrial complex that is basically now lagging behind the latest technological advances.
And it's an interesting phenomenon because you have conventional warfare that for all of human history was, for the most part, much more successful. Now you're having countries like Ukraine, in some ways Iran, that are able to do this on the cheap and are able to push back these much larger military industrial complexes, as you said, whether it's Russia, whether it's the United States, and hold off long enough to make it painful for the larger countries to continue on their path. I mean, the reality is that Putin will fight this war of attrition until the day it's over because he doesn't care about Pyrrhic victories. He doesn't care really about his country's economy. But the question is, how long is he going to be able to keep this up in Ukraine? Because this was supposed to be a war that was supposed to last a few days. To some extent, it kind of reminds me of the Russo-Japanese War in 1905, where the Russians thought they were going to, kick this little Japanese country to the curb. And then, of course, it didn't work out that way. The Baltic Fleet got destroyed, and that war was over, not in the way the Russians wanted. It ultimately led, in some ways, to the collapse of the existing order in Russia. Is this, in your view, is this ever going to lead to a change domestically in Russia, because this wasn't the lightning fast war that the Russians wanted? I mean, every Russian leader goes down because ultimately they did not deliver militarily, whether it was, the Tsar in 1918 or 1917, I should say, or the Soviet Union after Afghanistan in 10 years. Is this something like that, or is this something different?
Look, if Russian history offers us any guidance, that is that tsars and dictators never lost power or influence because they sacrificed too many people for a war that ended up well in the public mind. But any war that went south, that's went awry, that's a problem. I mean, we can go as far as the 16th century, the Ivan the Terrible, the so-called the Livonian War, that he started, again, same idea. We just go there, just few quick successes, and then it prolonged, protracted. And it ended up, with the collapse of his rule and lead to the almost a collapse of the Russian state eventually later on. But the good examples could be found in the 19th century. It's the first Crimean War that Tsar Nicholas I started in 1853. He thought it was an easy victory against Turkish Empire, but he, again, big plans. The main idea was, okay, I take control of the Holy Land. And the Britain and France decided it was just a little bit too much. And because of his very ambitious plans, Austro-Hungarian Empire decided, Austrian Empire at that time yet, decided also to stay away. And it led to a disastrous Crimean War. And his successor, Alexander II, started the most comprehensive liberal reforms in Russian history. Then you just mentioned Russo-Japanese War. But by the way, it was 1,000 miles away from Moscow and St. Petersburg. I mean, God knows where. It's had no real effect on Russian economy but psychologically, it almost led to the collapse of the dynasty. And Tsar had to go against his natural instincts and to call for the parliament. It's the first time Russia became a constitutional monarchy. In 1917, the stalemate on many believed it was just, the disastrous war, led to the collapse of the first dynasty empire, and then just Bolsheviks took over. 1989, same story. It looked like, it was very organized retreat. I remember, I'm old enough to remember, February 15th, 1989, the Soviet troops left Afghanistan, crossed the bridge, and General Gromov was there. It's almost like a parade.
Yeah.
They managed to keep Najibullah pro-Soviet government in Kabul for, I think, 2.5 more years before it was taken over by first Taliban. Mujahids first, I think this is. I'm not sure what's this. I'm already lost count. But psychologically, when empire goes backward, that's it. And by the end of 1989, Soviet empire collapsed in Eastern Europe, and in less than 3 years, Soviet Union ceased to exist. And Putin, I think, recognizes that it's. I'm not sure, he knows history. I mean, he read a few books here and there, and I have very little, low opinion about his intellect. But he's an ultimate survivor. We should give him credit. Staying in power for 26 years, I mean, just almost as long as Stalin. So that's not easy. And this is so he became president of Russia when Clinton was president of the United States. Yeah. Just imagine. So this is this timeline, and Putin knows that failure in Ukraine means the end. And now you see the first signs. It's the first. You following this the Russian internet. I've been reading for the last couple of years. I've been reading Russian, the so-called Z channels, the military commentators. Yeah. The last few months, it's a music to my ears. It's very clir things are going the wrong way, and people sense it. And now it's just Ukraine is so successful attacking, Russian infrastructure. Yesterday, there's some drones crossed, Putin's defense in Moscow. Again, it's small things in Moscow and St. Petersburg, but people understand it's not the same story. They don't care about Ukrainians being killed, but they don't want to let Putin, stay there safe while they're being hit. So there's one rule that I think it's not mathematically proven, but my experience tells me that people start rising. The temperature is rising when people the public, it's a wisdom of the crowd. They smell the regime is weaker. Nobody goes against the regime which is strong. But when they smell weakness, and I don't know how to make a formula out of that, but I think people recognize Putin is getting weaker. And that's why I think Putin now also can smell danger. It's not surprising we see European intel. I don't know where they got the intel, but about potential conspiracy of, okay, we don't have Stauffenbergs there, but this is not about saving mother country. It's not about, great Germany to prevent us from a disaster. This is a mafia state, and that's about money. This is everything that kept Putin in power was his unique ability to maneuver against among various oligarchic groups and to secure the interest and to guarantee that whatever he did, whether it was just going after some other oligarchs like Khodorkovsky or starting wars or even just going massively against Ukraine, it always benefited them. The war in Ukraine, proved to be very profitable. No longer. And when we look at all these, oil, factories and refineries and other, the plants that military plants provide that doing manufacturing munitions, this is not just a target here or there. Somebody owns them. We're talking about billions of dollars not being lost by the state, by individuals behind it. And something tells me that they may not be very happy to continue, accepting these losses for what? They could tolerate it for a while, but it seems that it's an endless road. And I think that there's something is cooking there, and that's why we could see it on the Russian internet now. And again, it's not because of Trump. Trump basically gave Putin everything. This is it. He was just, he was throwing the lifeline to Putin
and more.
He keeps trying to save him, but it's not enough. So that's why again I go back to the same point: is this Putin may be so desperate that trying to illustrate that he's still in charge and he can inflict damage to the enemies. He can just have a small, not invasion, but incursion in one of the Baltic nations to prove NATO is dead, because as long as Trump is there in the Oval Office and he's still unchecked, and that will probably last. Putin probably follows it. He knows that by the end of the year that will be over. So Democrats will definitely take the House and probably the Senate, but definitely even the House is enough to end Trump's unchecked rule. And that's why I think we are now just have these 6 months of very, very, it's a very dangerous moment where Putin, out of desperation, and to take the attention away and just to talk about, just about him destroying NATO and proving that America is no longer part of that. So whatever. So dictators always try to change narratives.
What does that look like, Garry? What does that look like to you? What does that look like to you when you say in the next 6 months something dangerous might happen, that he might lash out just to prove his power? What do you think that could be?
Look, again, this is the question: Putin is war. I mean, it's no longer about winnable. It's the entire Russian economy, society. I mean, there's every layer of Russian life now is war. It's country. It's on the war footing. So from kindergarten, when they're just being brainwashed, to school kids that are being trained to collect drones. I'm not trying to sell something to you. I'm simply translating it from Russian. It's a Russian official goal now to have 1 million drone operators by 2030. For what? So it's now abortions are. I mean, I wouldn't say they never had a law to ban it, but in most places you cannot get it because Putin's goal is just to have kids. So it's economy. It's war. So it's the money that's being allocated is war now. He is afraid of doing mobilization, not because he cares about Russian people, but because the moment you see body bags going to Moscow and St. Petersburg, that might be dangerous. So he's collecting people from faraway regions, and now they're paying more and more for contracts. In St. Petersburg today, it's $47,000 one-off payment, which is it's a fortune in Russia if you sign up. In Moscow countryside, $36,000. It's insane amount of money, but he has no way back. If the war ends, with no result or just with negative result, that's over. That's Russian history.
Yeah.
So that's why Putin will continue fighting as long as he has resources. That's why depleting his resources, it's whatever, whether it's brains, money, or manpower. So that's our goal.
This question from Olga Pavlova on Substack, and you and I both sometimes go down these rabbit holes of reading Russian ultranationalist or media, or as you said, these military journals, and it kind of makes your head explode. But are they getting? It's not just Ukraine. It's not just Poland, right? They're also talking about Bulgaria, Moldova. Well, Moldova is, of course, something that they tried to do a few months ago and failed. But is Bulgaria something that they're keeping an eye on?
Look, first of all, I mean, there are no ultra-nationalist Russian factions. It's like, debating whether you have some ultra-nationalist German faction under Hitler. Putin is the end line. So that's why trying to speculate, if he goes down, it could be worse. No, it cannot be worse. For a very simple reason. The most unstable and dangerous regime is one-man dictatorship. Because it's about one person and his phobias, his manias, his character, and his belief in his own, unique ability to rule things. Any kind of Politburo mafia structure is less dangerous for a very simple reason. They negotiate. That's why it was Stalin, and after Stalin we had, the Soviet Union was less dangerous because they had various factions. There was no one leader, Khrushchev and Brezhnev, but not the same powerful as Stalin. So Putin is absolutely the worst one. So regarding the taking Bulgaria, I mean, I doubt very much that they can take any other country. They can. First of all, Bulgaria, it's you have to cross other countries, and it seems to me that they're not in the position to take over Moldova. Ukraine is there, so this is Russian army is stuck there. So that's why I think it's if there's any threat. It's not against Bulgaria or Romania. It's more likely Latvia or Estonia again for small incursions. Putin needs to keep going. It's like bicycle. You have to pedal. You stop, you fall.
What do you make of these little trips that Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff take to the Kremlin? To negotiate something that obviously they're in no position to negotiate. The United States is in no position to negotiate. I sense that in a few months, Trump will say to Zelensky, or will try to say to Zelensky, I still believe there's some in Congress who are maybe going to prevent him from doing that, but say to Zelensky, I've had it with you. You have to give, either the Donbass or whatever else he wants to Putin so we can end this war and be done with it. And of course, Zelensky can't do that for a number of reasons, not the least of which is constitutionally he's precluded from doing that. And at which point the United States does what?
Are we talking about the United States or about Trump administration?
Well,
for me, it's fundamental difference because Witkoff and Kushner are not speaking on behalf of the United States. It's a business deal. That's why it's not Marco Rubio. We're talking about a fundamental, just agreement that may, end or may not end the war. And Trump is sending his business partner and his son-in-law, that are there to make a deal. And by the way, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think they ever visited Kyiv.
No, they had somebody else do that. Yeah.
No, it's the two real estate guys, and they have a dream of their life. They thought they were about to sell for their own interest a piece of real estate size of New Jersey. It's a part of Donbass. So no doubt that there was so much money, on the table and under the table. And again, it failed because thanks to God, so Europeans, there's definitely Merz and Meloni and Poles and Tusk, they basically helped Zelensky to say, Zelensky had courage, but they also offered him means to say no. And now it's no longer relevant. That's why this negotiation is going nowhere, because Ukraine is doing so well. There's no chance even that Russia can break through. They can probably win just a little bit of a couple of square miles here and there, but the front line is frozen. It's not going to happen. And war of attrition, Russia is big. And that's a problem of a big country with so many oil terminals, oil refineries, oil factories, and you cannot defend all of them, especially because Putin takes most of the anti-drone defenses and all defense systems just around him. So that's why Ukraine is, I wouldn't say comfortable position, but they survived the harshest winter in our memory, and the mood in Kiev now is fairly positive. They first time they think they have a chance. They have a chance of winning the war of attrition, which is quite amazing, because Europe is behind them. Actually, one of the questions was about weapons. Yes, Europe is working hard now. Last year, we already had 500 new startups on drones. It's just European companies are actively working in Ukraine. By the way, some American private companies also working there, and I believe Pentagon is also already, benefiting from this knowledge. And very important that Europe now is, just thanks to Trump, is forced to build its own military production. So the new lines. Germany is now this year is allocated 120 billion euros. So in total, I think the European package, for the next few years is 800 billion euros. It's a lot of money. And the fact is that very soon American companies will pay for Trump's arrogance, because why Europe should buy it? It's not just about, this is whether you have a kill switch. Why this is, it's we all know America's production is, let's say, overpriced. So Europe will start doing something there. It's not that Europe has no capacities. They have been forced. It was comfortable for them not to do that, but America had a huge advantage, because it was all this, this Trump's, complaints. Oh, they pay, we pay for them. No. They paid for your damn weapons. So when you look at the balance, so it's the same with the bases. I mean, these bases, just basically allowed America to operate in the Middle East, because without Rammstein, you cannot operate in the Middle East. I mean, it's not just, when Trump is an idiot, we know that, that's deranged, but people around him. So this is, I every time I hear this nonsense, I read this deranged tweet. What about people around him? Okay, you have Hexet, who had some common sense. I think 10 years ago, he and Rubio and Cruz, they all wrote about Trump because they saw the Trump's, at his face value. But now with all these people, Scott Bessent, I mean, he's a decent man with a lot of knowledge. How can you repeat this nonsense about tariff?
No, listen, ambition is a hell of a drug, but the real question to me is, Gary, how does this end? You and I have not set foot in Russia in I don't know the last time you were there. I have not been there in decades. I mean, I'm now banned from going there. I'm on, a list. You are on a list. We neither.
No. I have two standing orders for my arrest.
Okay, yeah, you're beyond.
First time you're talking to an indicted terrorist.
No, so. I know you're beyond a list. You are a stone cold criminal. But
yeah.
But the question is, do you and I, do you foresee in the next 5 years that you and I will be able to go there? Is this something? Because I can't imagine how this ends. You said it's a war of attrition, but you also say that Russia is a huge country and Putin's going to fight to the last person, because because Pyrrhic victories are something the Russians are very used to. And he's been conditioning his people for a very long time to accept it. So tell me how this ends.
Look, it's fighting if they believe war is winnable. The greatest danger for Putin is that people could reach a conclusion that the war is not winnable, and that they are suffering for nothing. And that's, one of my friends told me this. That's he heard from professionals that why we don't have white bears, polar bears in the circus. Again, I just tell you what I heard. Okay. It's a story. There's no way to indicate the aggression. It's every other animal. You can see the tail, there's something with the eyes. White bear goes just from boom. So he said Russia is a kind of a white polar bear. So it will happen overnight. But we actually could see, and like with polar bear, I think we see now it's like bubbles, on this old volcano. I could sense the growing discomfort. So I cannot tell you what comes next. So, but at the end of the day, this empire must die, and while we're talking about about all the problems on the Western front, so we should not forget about the real elephant or a dragon on the other side. And I think that's a deadly threat to Russia. And that's when Putin goes down, I think that will be the main or one of the top accusations against his administration, his rule, that he basically sold us to China. China, there's as few people remember, China is the only country that has a massive territorial claim to Russia. virtually every territory from Vladivostok to Chita, which is 1.5 million square kilometers. It's 2.5 times France by territory. So it was China until 1860, just until 1860. And China is gradually, just recovering its sovereignty. By the way, there's no Vladivostok on Chinese maps. It's Haishevin, and Chinese custom operating there first time since 1860. And we are talking about, this is a vast region with natural resources, with fewer people, with a huge disbalance demographically, male, female.
Yeah.
So it was always a gap about 10 years, in life expectancy in Russia, male, female. And now with the war that depleted many villages and towns there, so it created even bigger challenge. You have many bachelors on the other side of the border. You have Chinese money. Start making, projections. And by the way, I think that is, while everybody talks about Taiwan, I think Xi Jinping's greatest dream could be not small rocky island, but recovering these territories that Russia took away from China 160 years ago.
Well, it's fascinating to me because what you're dealing with right now is as you all so well said. I mean, it doesn't seem like anything happens historically in Russia, and then one day somebody's storming the Winter Palace and nobody understands what's going on.
Or the Tsar dies.
Or the Tsar dies, right?
So for unnatural causes.
Right. Question for you, because you're talking about Ukraine and your organization, the Renewed Democracy Initiative. You just led a delegation to Ukraine. You delivered over $15 million in direct aid. What does that look like? What does your organization do in Ukraine?
We started from day one because we had a program that called Front Lines of Freedom, and the Ukrainian war is exactly what we were, just dealing with, front lines of freedom. So originally the idea of RDI, or Renewed Democracy Initiative, that I formed in 2017 was to help Americans to understand the threat to democracy that coming from radicals on the right or the left. So now I never thought that, I would be sharing my Soviet and Russian experience with Americans, because it's more difficult to understand the threat when you just, you grew up in a free country and you take most of the freedoms you take for granted. So it's there. It's like breathing, this normal air. But I could sense when Trump was elected first time that this great country could go through a very perilous time, and that's why I built RDI. And the idea is that we can use dissidents like myself, and we have 100 dissidents plus from 40 repressive countries that are just talking to various American, just audiences, just sharing our experience. But Ukraine became our most important engagement, because we in March we had the first online connection with some of my former chess colleagues who were on the front line, and then Minister of Foreign Affairs Dmitry Kuleba, and raised first $800,000 to support Ukraine, which is, again, at that time it was very important. Actually, it helped their cyber defenses, which is just originally protected Ukraine against other kinds of attacks. And over time, we raised over $15 million, and the last delegation that went to Kyiv and Kharkiv brought heating equipment and also food, MREs, meals ready to eat. Again, it's the experience. It's people, it's a different mood now. They believe they can win, and it's a huge price being paid, they don't know when it's going to end. There's no, because it may end tomorrow, unlikely, but they know they will have to pay even bigger price. But they also know that that's their last stand, and we are very proud that we would help, and we could keep working, just because it's not just money there, it's also lobbying. For instance, what we did, I think 2 years ago when we had this, when the U.S. House debated this $61 billion package for Ukraine, and under Trump's guidance, Republicans blocked it, so we just couldn't get it through. We organized a trip of some of the top conservatives, Tory leaders, including former Prime Minister Liz Truss. We may disagree with so many issues, but they were pro-Ukrainians. And they turned some votes. So at our calculation, we turned 13 votes by just, again, bringing people in. It's all about being creative and trying to help as much as we can.
Yeah, it's so, and I think it's so important for people to actually go there and to see what's happening on the front lines.
Exactly, and it's and again, it's not, this is the global war. That's very important, and that's what Trump administration is trying to downplay. It's you can't separate the things. It's not surprising that it's our enemies. They're together. Russia and Iran working, whether they kill Ukrainians or whether they attack American bases or yes, supporting terrorists in the Middle East. So they work together, and behind them, of course, it's a Chinese dragon. So, but it's recognizing this is a battle that doesn't end in Ukraine. The outcome of this war will be felt throughout the globe, from Taiwan to Nicaragua, from Belarus to Zimbabwe. It's about trends, global trends. And Ukrainians they made one miracle, and it's our duty to do whatever we can to stand with them.
Well said. We have just a few minutes left, and I would love for you to answer this question, because it's one that I think is fascinating. Russia's never had Western-style democracy.
Look, the answer is very simple. So I'm quite skeptical about my compatriots willingly accepted the norms of Western democracy. So I always say that they will not embrace it by heart. They might, very likely, to embrace it by stomach. So it's all about consumer mentality, and also if Russians are forced to make a choice, a painful choice between staying, in its current, in its current, shape, and becoming eventually Chinese satellite, or paying enormous price to go back to Europe. I think they will choose the latter, again, out of personal interest rather than about belief in democracy. But so that's the best we can offer. But nothing will happen in Russia, nothing, until Ukraine wins. That's why the groups that I'm working with in Russian opposition, we have a very simple motto on our banner: victory for Ukraine, freedom for Russia, in that order.
Everybody here who does not know the Renewed Democracy Institute that Garry is running, please go check it out. Please go check out Garry's Substack, which is also so.
The next move, by the way, this is very chess.
Next move. I know you don't necessarily want to talk about chess.
No, but it's the next move. So I think it's important to think about our next moves. It's not just about. You can't win the war by just saying it's bad. You have to offer some alternatives. That's what we're trying to accomplish.
In addition to being a wanted criminal in Russia, Garry's also a pretty good chess player. So.
Yeah. By the way, it's in Russian opposition now. Unless you have one, indictment in Russia, nobody will talk to you.
Yes,
I have two.
It is. I was honored when I ended up on that list that Putin put out, banning people from.
But you're on the banned list. Okay, good. It's a good start.
You have gotten me beat, my friend. I have got nothing on you. Garry Kasparov, it is just so wonderful to talk to you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks for inviting me.
Immense knowledge and just having this great conversation. Please come back. Really, really grateful to you. Thank you so much.
You.